Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. I think we have a quorum. Today we're going to be hearing SB 206, and Senator Cowser, seeing as you are our first customer this year, we're going to go ahead and get through with a little housekeeping real quick. And in the committee folders, you'll see the rules, pretty standard for a House committee here. If there are no questions, go ahead and have a motion to adopt the rules. Move second. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, committee. Senator Cowser.
Which calls for a balanced budget amendment. That bill has also passed the Senate. It is in your Judiciary Committee, the civil branch of that, and will be heard hopefully later this week. This comes from our concerns about the fiscal shape of the nation being in such dire straits with $16.5 trillion in debt. Now each U.S. citizen is born with $45,000 of debt that we've accrued, spent on our generation to pass that down. I think it's probably one of the most serious circumstances facing our nation today is our fiscal condition. 49 states have balanced budget amendments just like Georgia does. So for their state spending levels, they're required to have balanced budgets. We've done it. We've done it through some very tough years here, these last few years, made some very tough choices. But we've kept a balanced budget, and it's possible to do. It's the responsible thing to do, and I think we need for our United States government to operate the same way. There are two mechanisms to amend the U.S. Constitution. They're both found in Article 5 of the Constitution. The first is that Congress itself may propose an amendment and then submit it to the states for ratification. That happened a number of times over the history of this country, and that's the most common method for that to be done. Still has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states once such an amendment is proposed by the United States Congress. In this case, Congress has demonstrated that they are unwilling to act. They're not even passing budgets, period, much less balanced budgets these days, and we're accruing about $1 trillion a year in additional debt. That's why you've had the debt ceiling crisis that's come up, the fiscal cliff that's come up, all of these various problems we're having because we're spending so much more money than we're bringing in. The Constitution provides an alternative method for proposing amendments to the Constitution if Congress fails to do so or refuses to do so. If 2/3 of the states, which will be 34 states, apply for an amendment convention to the Constitution, Congress must grant that. Right now, 19 states have passed identical resolutions to the Senate Resolution 371 that I'm referencing, calling on Congress to call an amendment convention of all the 50 states. We're asking for the single purpose for a balanced budget amendment, not some type of constitutional convention to totally rewrite the Constitution or come up with other areas. It's a single subject matter we're requesting for a balanced budget amendment. That's been joined by 19 other states. Georgia would be number 20. There are a great number of states that are considering this type of provision now. This came out of a proposal through ALEC. And there is a balanced budget amendment task force that I've been involved in a couple of years. Lynn Riley in the House has been also involved in it. And it's a strong movement. I think we'll ultimately probably take us a couple more years, 2/3 of the states to call for this amendment convention to amend the U.S. Constitution requiring a balanced budget. There is a little bit of pushback, and it's generally from what I call conspiracy theorists. But it's from people that have this fear. They call this a constitutional convention or a con-con, that it'll get out of hand and be a runaway convention, and that they may totally rewrite the United States Constitution in some way. I think that's an unrealistic fear, because even if an amendment is proposed by a convention, the method that I'm advocating for under Senate Resolution 371, it still would have to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So I think it's unrealistic to believe that there would be some total rewrite of our Constitution. If there was, it'd be because 3/4 of our people wanted to make those changes. But I believe you can limit a convention to one subject matter. That is certainly what our resolution and the other 19 seek to do. But to give peace of mind to those people that fear some type of runaway convention, we have Senate Bill 206. It's referred to as a Delegate Limitation Act. Many of these other states are also passing this. And what it does is defines who would serve as delegates for an amendment convention, if that's called for by Congress or when it's called for by Congress. It would let the governor appoint 2 delegates, the lieutenant governor appoint 2 delegates, and the Speaker of the House appoint 2 delegates. Those 6 delegates would then appoint or elect a 7th delegate from amongst them, not from one of them, but whoever they agreed upon. Those 7 delegates would represent the state of Georgia at the amendment convention. The bill includes an oath of office for those delegates where they would swear that they would only consider a balanced budget amendment. They would not veer from that or any other instructions given to them by our legislature. If they were to violate that oath and consider any other type of amendment to the United States Constitution, they may be immediately recalled by our legislature and can be replaced in accordance with the appointment process. So in other words, if one of them that had been appointed by the governor started talking about some other type of amendment, he can be recalled for violation of his oath, and the governor would replace him. Whoever made the original appointment would make the replacement appointment. This should give us the assurance that we need to make certain that a convention does not get out of hand in any way and consider more than that single subject matter. I'm willing to take questions on any other specific concerns, but this was intended to address any of those concerns that there might be some type of runaway convention. I can tell you, last year we passed a balanced budget amendment. It passed the Senate. It got out of Chairman Mark Hamilton's, I think it was Government Oversight Committee, actually got on the rules calendar last year on the last day, but didn't get called up to pass. But this is a very strong fiscal conservative measure. I think Congress has demonstrated that they're not going to do this on their own, and it's our only way to rein them in. The Constitution provides for it. I did get some pushback last year, particularly from the Tea Party folks, Debbie Dooley and Julianne Thompson. They have both communicated with me and say they have now, with this Delegate Limitation Act, they have no opposition. In fact, they support this measure. I don't think it's a partisan matter. The identical type resolution for a balanced budget amendment was passed by the Georgia legislature in 1976. And if you know your political history, it was completely dominated by the Democratic Party at that time. You know, this is not a partisan issue. It's something that needs to be addressed by any fiscal conservatives in our country, and I think this is a mechanism to make it more likely that it'll pass.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Holt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your logic, and I think it is wisdom to pursue something like this. Can you speak to, do you have any knowledge of whether there's any precedent for something like this being sufficiently binding upon the individuals that we would appoint to such a convention?
We've never had such a convention in the history of the country, other than our initial conventions to write the Constitution. There hasn't been an amendment convention, so we don't have precedent whatsoever. One other thing I call for in this Delegate Limitation Act is it dictates that Georgia will participate in this type of amendment convention only if each state gets 1 vote. You know, people asked me last year, well, who are our delegates going to be? How is it going to operate? And I wasn't able to answer those questions because it hasn't been called yet. Congress has to call that convention, and I think each state will be able to determine their own makeup of their delegation, and whether it's appointed or elected or representatives from elected officials or whatever. And that shouldn't really matter to us so long as each state has an equal voice, just gets 1 vote. And so I set forth this mechanism, and it's widely used by the other, it's model legislation. Other states that are asking for this agree to do something very similar to the way we're handling it.
Representative Gregory.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, my question, and you'll have to forgive me, I came in obviously a little bit late here, but even if we could bind our delegates to an Article 5 convention, you know, what's to say that the other states, once the convention is called, would, you know, they obviously wouldn't necessarily have the same binding clauses from their state, so we could still open ourselves up to really some horrible abuses happening to our Constitution if the wrong people from other states are sent.
That is a possibility. We cannot control those other states, but what I'm telling you is that 19 other states have passed identical resolutions to Senate Resolution 371 that's asking for the single purpose, specific purpose. Many of them are also adopting the identical Delegation Limitation Act that is what this SB 206 is. And the final fallback, you may not have been here when I mentioned it, but is that whatever comes out of this convention, whatever the proposed amendment is, or in your fears proposed amendments, if there were more than one that they defied this in some way, or other states did it if we withdrew our participation, still has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. I think there's a fundamental misconception by some of the people that have this fear is that the convention itself can pass an amendment to the Constitution. They can only propose one to the states for ratification, and it takes 3/4 of the states to ratify. So I don't think it's a realistic fear to think that there would be some radical rewrite of the United States Constitution or multiple amendments done. I think all of the other states that are following the format, the request that we have here, are only asking for a single purpose. So I don't think it's realistic to assume that their delegates would all defy those state legislatures and exceed their authority. But in the event they did, we just wouldn't ratify it or wouldn't vote for it. And so long as 3/4 of the states didn't, it would never pass or change the Constitution.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you very much.
Representative Waits, do you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. Is it possible that you will be open to a friendly amendment allowing the minority party to have a vote, one delegate?
I think they're already built in. They can be appointed.
Well, I'm simply...
The governor can appoint a member of the minority party. The lieutenant governor could, the speaker could, or those members, when they elect somebody, could. We don't know when this is going to happen. There's a very real possibility that the governor's going to be a Democrat by the time this comes about. Who knows? I mean, it's up to the public who elects the lieutenant governor and who elects the speaker. They can have somebody from their party doing it, but there's no requirement that a person be in the Republican Party to be appointed or the Democratic Party. It's left up to those officials to decide that. And this will probably take a few years before we get to 34 states and that convention gets called. So it's hard to predict who would be appointed there. I have always maintained that this is a nonpartisan issue. It should make no difference. And like I say, when it first passed in '76, it was about a 90% Democratic state legislature at that time. This is just a basic fiscal responsibility bill. It doesn't matter what party you are to do it.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I was going back and thinking about Representative Gregory's question, and I think you said 19 states have already passed this limitation.
Passed identical legislation.
So I was just doing the algebra here myself, and I think 34 states is a 2/3 majority.
Correct.
So you subtract 19 from 50, and you don't have enough states that could vote on something otherwise to make that 2/3 majority needed, right?
Yeah, especially since Georgia will be the 20th state, so it even helps your math even more.
Thank you.
Representative Chapman.
Yes, sir. Senator, the bill that you said almost came to the floor for a vote last year in the House.
Yes, sir.
Are you going to propose that bill be held and this bill be passed first, so so you have your protection in place before we agree to call a convention?
I think that's the most logical. Obviously, that will be beyond my control as a senator to set your calendar. But I don't know why they were sent to different committees, but that's part of the House process.
That would be the wise course of action.
That would be my preference. I think that would eliminate any concerns of people of a runaway convention. If that would be a reason for them to vote against the balanced budget amendment, it would be my preference.
So you're not opposed to that?
Not at all. I would encourage that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? In that case, I will open floor for a motion. We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad to report to you that your bill has, I've reached agreement with the Judiciary Chairman to shift it to higher ed with the blessings of our pro tem, and I'll be having a hearing for you at our next meeting. If you need it sooner, You let me know, we'll call a special meeting.
You are doing the state of Georgia and your constituents a great service. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.